Welcome back to the Backyard Professor videos. I'm Kerry Schertz, the Backyard Professor. I'm out here in my backyard once again, just enjoying the beautiful day and beautiful Mother Nature, and I'm discussing this argument against the Book of Mormon that there's nothing in its favor, archaeologically, historically, linguistically. I think that argument's false. In Hugh Nibley's book, There Were Jaredites, this is a reprint of his materials from Farms back in 1988. He discusses this idea. Oh, did you hear that beautiful meadowlark? It's kind of nice to be out here in the Mother Nature. Hugh Nibley discussed this idea of the Jaredite Shining Stones. In Joseph Smith's day, and actually I've seen it here in the internet too, the shining stones, these ideas of shining stones, have been made fun of. Now, the Book of Ether in the Book of Mormon, which is supposed to be the oldest book, it says that the Jaredite barges were copied after Noah's Ark, after the pattern of Noah's Ark. Not necessarily the same size, of course, but it's very interesting that this theme harks back to Noah. Nibley notes on page 370 some very interesting ideas that I want to share with you. He says, following the example of Noah, the brother of Jared proceeded to cast some clear transparent stones in the hope that they might be made to shine in the dark. First of all, the brother of Jared made some transparent stones by moltening them out of rock, a process requiring a very high temperature. Now, the oldest writings of India, reporting her oldest traditions, have a great deal to say about a particular stone that shines in the dark. Were you aware of that? I think this is fascinating. Such a stone, we are told, can be produced only by subjecting it to terrific heat. And sometimes it takes them 9 years to produce this stone. It's a very interesting thing. This would turn out to be a perfectly clear, transparent crystal, we are told, and this crystal would illuminate even the deepest darkness, and sometimes shine as brilliantly and brightly as the sun. Now, the two scholars, Meyer and Prince, they have traced this strange belief of shining stones from India to China and into the West, interestingly enough. It is mentioned in the West by some of the most celebrated scholars of the Middle Ages. It was even believed in Europe that the Holy Grail was such a jewel, and of such fiery power that the phoenix bird cremated itself in its heat, and was thus reborn. For among other things, the stone had the power of regeneration. The stone was known to the Greeks, and hence to the Middle Ages, as the pyrophilus, or the friend of fire. It's most fully described in the Indian sources, which say it was a perfectly transparent crystal, and it also went by the name of moon friend, or Jalakanta. And this causes the waters to part. This is one of the properties of this fabulous jewel. For among all of its marvelous properties, such as protecting its bearer from poisons and lightning and fire and enemies, its most particular power and virtue was that it enabled its possessor to pass unharmed through the depths of the water. We have a transparent stone formed with fierce heat that shines in the dark and guides and preserves its owner beneath the waves. Now, where do you think the Indians got that idea? It's fascinating, isn't it? It's also been traced to the earliest Babylonian account of, guess what? The deluge. Later writers quote a letter from the philosopher Asclepius to the Emperor Augustus, in which he describes the pyrophilus as the heart of a poisoned man turned into stone by 9 years in the furnace. He also says that Alexander the Great possessed such a stone which he carried in his belt. But that once while he was bathing, he laid the belt on the side on the ground, and a serpent came and stole the stone and vomited it up in the Euphrates. Aristotle tells the same story 300 years earlier, and other Greek writers know of many years before Alexander was born. In these older versions, the stone is interchangeable with the plant of life. It was a life-giving stone, as the case of the phoenix shows this, or the medicine of immortality. In this form, the story is identical with the prehistoric Sumerian tale of Gilgamesh, and most of us are familiar with the story of Gilgamesh and the plant of life. Scholars were prompt to recognize as soon as the latter was published toward the end of the 19th century. Prince points out that this relationship is illustrating both the immense span of time over which these traditions can survive and the degree to which they can become distorted and changed, and even though they preserve clear recognizable traits in themselves. This story seems to go back to the pre-Sumerian epic Milu, as Kramer talks about. In the oldest Babylonian version, only one person can tell the hero how and where to get the plant of life, and that person is Utnapishtim. This is the Babylonian version of Noah. The plant, he who had possessed the plant of life, which from the earliest times seems to be confused with a shining stone. That's on page 372. This idea that in the oldest stratum of the Book of Mormon, we actually find a tradition that is traced back into pre-Sumerian times. We find it evidenced in various different garbled tellings of various epics that have been archaeologically excavated, translated, and now we can read them. I have 3 or 4 different copies of the Epic of Gilgamesh myself. Throughout antiquity, all the way up even into the Middle Ages, tying in some of our most sacred traditions and legends of the Holy Grail, this principle that even Noah had a shining stone in the ark, and he wanted to use it to tell the difference between the night and the day, because his ark was based on the Sumerian prototype, which was basically like submarines, is how Nibley put it. The Jaredites copied that pattern. The point is, it's not made up in the Book of Mormon. This tradition, this pattern of both the Modger boats and the shining stones in the boats, Joseph Smith didn't make that up in the Book of Ether. The Jaredites were already privy to this particular thrust and connection of this legend and these symbols, and they knew how to get their own shining stones. Even the Urim and Thummim of the Old Testament, with on the breast of the priestplate, or the priest's breastplate, even that ties into this as a means of oracular revelation. This is another demonstration, another evidence that the Book of Mormon taps into already existing ideas, even though they are strange to us in our day. They certainly weren't in antiquity. This is another piece of the evidence that refutes the argument that the Book of Mormon has nothing going for it archaeologically, historically, or linguistically. That argument is simply false.